previous videos, we've seen that there are two types of repetition structures, a fixed iterative repetition and a conditional repetition. And within the conditional repetition, we have two variations, a while loop and a do while. And in the fixed iterative, we have a for loop. So three types of loops. And the question is, which one should I use? Well, the obvious answer to that is it depends on what you want to do and what your programming style is. Let me give you a couple pointers. One is these are often interchangeable, and you can choose to do a for loop or a while loop, and it really doesn't matter. They can both be used for your purposes. However, a good general rule is you want to use a fixed iterative if you know how many times you want to go through that loop. Or maybe you have a beginning value and an ending value for that counter variable. I want to find the sum of the numbers between 6 and 12. And you know you're going to start with 6 and end with 12 and go through the loop and add those numbers together. Or I want to go through each letter of a string, and I know that there are 20 characters in that string, so the indices are going to go from 0 to 19, and a for loop would be great for examining each one of those characters. So in this example, I have a string of my cougar has fleas. It has 20 characters, and those indices go from 0 to 19. I want to find out how many spaces there are in that string. And so I can use a for loop, and I know that there are 20 characters, so I can start with 0, and I can go as long as I is less than mystring.length. Or I could have said I is less than 20 or less than or equal to 19. I like to use mystring.length because my string maybe would change. Maybe I'll put a different string in there later, and I'm going to go through each character of that string. And of course, we're going to increment each time through the loop. As I go through that loop, I'm going to examine each character using my value of I, which is going to be each character in the string, looking at one character at a time and seeing if it contains a space. And if it does, I'm going to increment how many spaces, which is my variable to track how many spaces there are. And then I'll show that in a message box. But often we don't know how many times a loop should execute to reach a particular result. And so it's based on some specific situation occurring, and that's where a conditional loop usually is best. Let's suppose I want to find out how many times I need to raise 2 to a certain power to find the value of 256. I don't know how many times that loop should execute, but I can use a while loop to figure that out. So my code is I'm going to have a variable my number equals 1, and I'm going to keep track of how many times I have to double it, and that's my doubled integer. And then a while loop, while my number is less than 256, which is my target, I'm going to raise my number to the power of 2, and then I'm going to add 1 to my variable of doubled. That's the doubled plus plus. At the end of that loop, when my number reaches 256, I'm going to then show the answer. And you see the message box being shown there in this example. And I said that we can often use either loop, either a while or a for. And so I'm going to do the same problem here with a for loop and show you that it can be done. I have the same two variables, my number and doubled. But my for loop is I'm going to take my number equal to 1. I'm going to do the for loop while my number is less than 256. And each time through, I will increment my number by 1. Since the for loop really is a conditional, it works. And so multiplying my number each time through the loop and then adding 1 to doubled, eventually I reach 256, the loop ends, and we display our dialog box. In the same manner, going back to our previous example, where we're finding how many spaces there were in a string, and we used a for loop, I could do the same thing with a while loop. And so here I have a variable of int equals I, and I'm going to do the loop while I is less than my string.length. So in essence, I'm going to go through each letter of that string, use the same if statement we used before, and then when that loop is done, once I has reached the value of the length of my string, I'm going to show the dialog box. Let's look at one more example of how a for loop and a while loop can be interchangeable. So earlier we did this demonstration of looking for the sum of numbers between a user-specified start and end integer. I'm going to double click on my button here to review that code. We used a for loop in that we went from the start value to the end value and simply added those numbers to our label, and then we incremented sum by the value of I. So we used a for loop there to do that. I'm going to do the same thing now with a while loop. And I'm going to start with an integer of I again, but we're going to have it equal num start. And then I'm going to change this for loop to a while loop. And I'm just going to comment this out. And my loop will now become while I is less than or equal to numEnd. And so each time through the loop, I'm going to add the number of I to my list box, and I'm going to sum I, but I also need to increment I. So let's increment I, just I++. Of course, I could have done an I plus equals 1 either way, or I equals I plus 1, 3 different ways of doing that. But let's run this and see if this still works. So here's my project. I'm going from 1 to 4. So if you remember, we should get 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, which would be a range of sum of 10, and we should get 1, 2, 3, 4 down this list. So I click sum the numbers, and that's exactly what I get. So I've replaced my for loop with a while loop, and it still works just fine. So I hope this helps you decide on whether you should use a fixed iterative or a conditional loop. And remember that in most cases, you can use either one.